Episode 1 of Invasion begins in the Arabian Desert in Yemen. An explosion overhead paves way for a meteor to rocket down to Earth and skid across the sandy surface. Dust clouds pick up as this cylindrical core suddenly lets out a piercing shriek and blasts the poor, unsuspecting farmer across the desert. Cut forward to Oklahoma, and John Bell Tyson prepares for another day on the job. His last day, in fact. His wife is quick to remind him retirement isn't the end, as Tyson silently steps out the door and makes his way into the office. First port of call: a stolen truck. Only, crop circles out in the yard, and a strange figure 8 of birds swooping and circling are incredibly unnerving signs. So naturally, Bell heads out to take a look. There's a massive crater in the middle of these crops, and nearby an abandoned car. As Bell takes a closer look, a whole plague of locusts come crashing through the crops. Daniel, the missing man around these parts, is nowhere to be seen, and Bell is convinced that he's been taken. But by whom? This singular event seems to pave way for a massive epidemic across in Long Island, where the Malik family reconvene in the hospital. All kids at the nearby school have come down with nosebleeds, apart from Luke. Anisha and Ahmed are obviously worried about their kids and try to reassure them that everything will be okay. Sarah, their daughter, is still bleeding as they drive to see Dr. Lockhart. All the vitals come back absolutely fine for her, so the doctor advises the family just to take it easy. For Luke, though, it appears he's playing up the chosen one trope in this. Anyway, Ahmed slips away that night, and it turns out he's actually cheating on Anisha. She follows a tracker to a secluded house and leaves her kids in the car while she witnesses him doing this firsthand. Distraught and angry, Anisha stuffs her face with food when she gets home, while the kids sleep on the sofa. His lover, Amanda Hornsby, has a whole profile set up on LinkedIn, and Anisha decides to go through and like every single post. When Ahmed eventually returns home, the pair butt heads, but everything soon goes awry when a power cut rocks the house. Fires are spread throughout the neighborhood, as it appears this incident is not isolated. In Tokyo, Japan, a businesswoman called Captain Mirai attends a press conference for JASA. She's preparing for her longest stay aboard the I.S.S, which is crucial to planning longer missions further afield. Overseeing this mission is the very clever Mitsuki Yamato, who works in communications. She runs a diagnostic on board the shuttle, but it soon becomes clear that her and Mirai have some chemistry together. The checks finish and the plane takes off, ready to make it to the ISS. The launch is a success and Yamato eventually heads back to her apartment. Up in the Hoshi 12 space shuttle, something rips right through the hull, and the quiet soon turns to stunned silence as these astronauts are almost certainly killed. Back on Earth, Bell prepares for his retirement, but he's not in a particularly celebratory mood. As he heads back to the crop circle and asks the Lord for a sign, a strange tentacle darts him in the back of the neck and kills him outright. As the camera pans up, an invisible ship flies away. We're not alone. The episode opens with Anisha watching as the couple across the street checks to make sure the other is okay, which understandably strikes a painful chord. She snaps out of it when Ahmed tells her they should get the children down to the basement. Once they're downstairs, it doesn't take long before Anisha can't stand being in the same room as her adulterous husband. She tries to leave, but Ahmed convinces her to stay with the children while he goes outside to see if he can figure out what happened. Upon stepping out the front door, he sees that the devastation to their neighborhood is even worse than they thought. None of his frantic and traumatized neighbors know what happened, either. As explanations move from natural disasters to a possible terrorist attack, Ahmed's neighbors notice that his house is the only one without any damage, which he simply chalks up to good luck. The tense moment is interrupted when he hears his children screaming and runs back inside, where Luke is writhing in pain due to a piercing noise only he seems to be able to hear. After checking his ears and not finding anything, Anisha tries to calm her son down. He responds by asking why she can't hear the voices saying Weijo over and over again. What Anisha can hear is her husband calling his mistress to make sure she's okay. Ahmed walks back in the room and lies about who he was on the phone with, which makes Anisha even more disgusted/angry. He tries to talk to her, but she shrugs him off to go look after her ailing son. Before Ahmed can figure out a way to justifying his behavior, a sound races overhead followed by all the windows in their kitchen being blown out. Anisha immediately springs into action and begins gathering supplies and getting the children ready to flee their home. Instead of helping her, Ahmed stands at the window before walking away in a haze. Later, Anisha gets everyone into the car only for Ahmed to try and fail repeatedly at starting their expensive Tesla. He gets out of the vehicle in a panic, sees one of their neighbors leaving and begs them to take him. In case you didn't hate this guy enough, he also tells them that it would just be him they'd need to fit in their vehicle and not the rest of his family. The neighbor refuses and drives off, leaving Ahmed to get an epic/awesome tongue lashing from his wife about what a coward he is. The best defense he can offer is that he was going to leave her that week, which she responds to by saying he picked a bad week to abandon his family. She then orders him back into the car before taking his phone and uses it to successfully start their vehicle. Over in London, a teenaged boy named Casper meets his friends on the way into school. The day appears to be starting off fine until a bully, Monty, shoves him to the ground. The incident is humiliating enough on its own, but he also spills his anti-seizure medication, causing Monty to taunt him even more. Thankfully, a teacher, Mr. Edwards, is able to put a stop to things, but is unable to do more when Casper refuses to confirm that Monty attacked him. Casper runs to the bathroom and takes a few pills, helping him to avoid having a seizure. He takes a moment to collect himself before heading back out to board the bus for a field trip. After his friends check to make sure he's okay, Monty and his pack of hyenas get on and begin acting like turds again. Thankfully, Monty and company get taken down a peg thanks to some biting remarks from Mr. Edwards and another student named Jamila, who Casper clearly has a crush on. As they head toward their destination, all the students' cell phones begin glitching before something causes the bus to jump in the air for a second. Mr. Edwards assumes it was a pothole and keeps driving. The sudden motion causes Casper's sketchbook full of sci-fi drawings to fall to the floor. Before he can retrieve it, Jamila grabs the book and looks through it. To Casper's relief/surprise, she totally digs his work. This leads to the pair listening together to Casper's 90s grunge rock on his old-school tape player, which is somehow both sweet and cringy. Later, while still listening to grunge with his crush, Casper looks out the window and sees sheep all running in the same direction, which is always a sign that something bad is about to happen. Sure enough, he begins to have a seizure, causing Jamila to become very concerned and rest of the bus to freak out. Things get much worse when objects falling from the sky cause Mr. Edwards to skid off the road and right into a giant ravine. Over in Tokyo, Mitsuki begins leaving a video journal for Hinata. The first entry consists of her talking about how much she misses Hinata and that she'll be making a video every day that they're apart. The next day, Mitsuki is called into work, where she learns that Mission Control has lost contact with Hinata's shuttle. Things become even more dire when she tries to piggyback a signal off other satellites only to learn that the American and Russian space programs are having similar communication issues. She manages to discover that the cruise ship sent out Mayday signals Mission Control never received, which the director immediately blames her for. Mitsuki eventually manages to uplink to one of the shuttle's cameras, which shows that the spacecraft has been ripped open and the crew is gone. As the Mission Control crew stare in stunned silence, she leaves the building and heads home before finally breaking down. The next day, Mitsuki is visited by her mother, who implies that Hinata's death might actually be a good thing since it will give her daughter a chance to fall in love with a man and live a clean life. As you can probably imagine, this sentiment does not go over well. After kicking her mother out, Mitsuki wanders the Tokyo nightlife scene in drunken stupor. She eventually sees a woman who she hallucinates as being Hinata and takes her home. In the middle of them hooking up, she comes to her senses, kicks the woman out, and pulls Hinata's star from the ceiling. In Afghanistan, a very well-liked and respected United States soldier named Trev, short for Trevant, puts on a happy face for the rest of his squad. What they don't know is that his relationship with his wife back home is terribly strained, which is tearing him up inside. Later, Trev and his squad are heading out on a mission when they lose contact with their other units. When they arrive in a nearby town, the residents say another group had already come through, although it's unclear if they're talking about other American soldiers, the Taliban, or something else entirely. The people say that whoever, or whatever, it was headed toward the school. When they check the building, however, all the soldiers find are a group of scared children and one of the building's walls completely blown out. Trev then notices that one of the kids has nosebleed and is drawing a circle in the dirt on one of the tables. When he and the translator ask what happened, the boy points to a strange dust formation in the distance and begins repeating a word, which I couldn't decipher, along with all the other kids. The squad checks out the location and finds an abandoned walkie near a rundown building. Moments after their comms begin to fail, the sand around them starts flying upward. The squad loses at least one member, but manages to make it out of the impossible sandstorm only to find themselves face to face with a giant version of the rock with suction cups we saw at the beginning of last episode. The soldiers begin firing on the object, which responds by blasting them all backward. The episode opens with Trev awakening alone, covered in sand, and badly injured. After finding his squad's vehicle, he tries to call for support and track his squad's locators, but is unsuccessful on both counts. The only thing he can do is place a bandage over a nasty-looking wound before heading off into the desert to look for help. After traveling by foot for a few hours, Trev becomes severely dehydrated and collapses to the ground, where he experiences a hallucination of his wife walking away before passing out. Sometime later, the soldier awakens to find a man, Kuchi, offering him water. He treats the Good Samaritan as potentially hostile, but still accepts the liquid salvation. Despite a massive language barrier, Kuchi is able to reveal that he saw Trev's missing squad members nearby. It's unclear if he offers to lead him there, but he does dress/treat the soldier's wound and help him recover. After the sun sets, the two men share stories in different languages about loves they've lost. For Kuchi, it was his beloved daughter Oranuz, who he named after Orion. She became sick one winter and died the next spring. For Trev, it was his estranged wife, who enjoyed looking at the stars. Although the men can't understand each other's words, they recognize their shared grief and are grateful to have someone to talk about it with. Over in New York, Anisha drives like a bat out of hell in an effort to get her family clear of the city. Unfortunately, she and everyone else in traffic are forced to stop when the entire city loses power and goes dark. The next day, Anisha takes her family to a crowded gas station. While Ahmed attempts to recharge their Tesla, she takes the children inside to go to the bathroom and grab some food. As a TV plays a report on the unexplainable devastation happening across the globe, she spots her husband getting accosted by a couple of racist douchebags who are trying to steal their car. She also notices a set of keys sitting on a nearby table that belong to a large family. After taking a moment to ponder her awful opportunity, Anisha grabs the keys, walks outside, and instructs Ahmed to let the men have their Tesla. Her husband grabs their luggage out of the car and transfers it to the stolen minivan, which departs the gas station moments before its owners come running after them. As they drive away, Luke and Sarah are clearly jarred by the sight of their mother doing something so blatantly wrong despite it being for their own protection/survival. That evening, Anisha manages to find a hotel room for her family. Unfortunately, it only has one bed. Things start to get weird when a news report they're watching begins glitching out and something in the static appears to start communicating with them. Before anything interesting can happen, Anisha changes the channel to cartoons. Later, as the broken family attempts to sleep, Ahmed implies that his wife might have taken things too far during their escape from the city. She correctly points out that he has no room to talk after attempting to leave with one of their neighbors and abandon them. Ahmed responds by throwing a pity party about how everyone hates him. He also has the gall to imply he shouldn't be faulted for wanting someone, his mistress, to love him. Anisha once again remarks on how she couldn't have been a better wife to him. This time, however, she also takes a pointed/well-deserved shot at his adulterous relationship. This angers Ahmed enough to leave the room, go to the front desk, and attempt to call his mistress. When he can't reach her, he returns to the hotel room and lays on the floor beside the family he doesn't deserve. Remember the giant ravine that the bus carrying Casper and the rest of his classmates fell into? Well, everyone somehow survived the fall. In fact, the only person who sustained any serious injuries was Mr. Edwards, who has a long metal bar impaled through his arm and is understandably in shock. Jamila isn't a nurse, but her mother is, which makes her somehow able to diagnose the severity of Mr. Edwards' injuries and get him stabilized. Casper tries to help but is roughed up by Monty, who blames his seizure for distracting their teacher and causing the accident. Asterisk side note, it was actually the objects that fell from the sky, but no one saw that because they were all watching Casper. Casper's friends managed to save him from getting beat up by offering Monty and one of his goons some snacks. Another of Casper's friends volunteers to try and climb out of the ravine to find help, but Monty forbids anyone from leaving. While the kids debate what to do next, Casper takes out his anti-seizure pills and sees that he only has a few of them left. That evening, as the children are building makeshift shelters, Monty unexpectedly comes over and apologizes for his behavior toward Casper. The bully appears to fall back on his old ways when he starts making fun of Casper's wheelchair-bound mother, but the pair end up sharing heart-wrenching stories about how both their fathers left. Monty divulges that his dad ran off with his secretary, an event that still scars him to this day. Casper reveals that his father was the one who crippled his mother before abandoning them both. He also admits that he watched it happen, too scared to do anything but remain frozen in place. Monty appears genuinely sympathetic before cruelly admitting that his behavior was all a ruse, and that his family is still happily intact. He also assures Casper that the deeply personal story he shared would be saved for a rainy day to torment him with. The rainy day comes later that night when Monty's self-proclaimed authority is challenged by the rest of the students. When he demands that they vote on it and comes up one short, the Boy King blackmails Casper into swinging the final tally his way. After everyone else goes to sleep, Casper checks in on Mr. Edwards, who babbles incoherently about metal raining from the sky. He then takes his next to last anti-seizure pill, has a sweet moment with Jamila, and begins drawing her as she falls asleep. He also totally misses a big cue/hint from his crush, but we should probably cut the poor guy some slack considering what he's been through today. Meanwhile, Monty goes outside and stomps out the group's signal fire, determined to retain his status as the Boy King of the ravine. After taking some time to grieve alone, Mitsuki gets a text from her control center friend, Kaito, and musters the will to head back into work. She arrives to find government officials removing data and records so they can investigate what happened to the shuttle. When Mitsuki tries to tell the director that she wants to figure out what happened, and that she's the only one who can do it, he digs in his heels and continues to blame her for the incident. Instead of backing down, she rips off the director's badge and makes a mad dash for the comms room. Kaito follows her, just ahead of the security guards, and gets inside the door, which she locks from the inside and resets the code. As the security team frantically tries to override the locks, she begins digging into the files to see what can be learned about the accident that killed her lover. After decrypting the video files, and poring over some painful images of Hinata alive and smiling before the end came, Mitsuki discovers that her lover's death was the result of something sudden and catastrophic, not the missed Mayday signals the director keeps trying to blame her for. Moments before the security team finally breaks back into the comm room, she manages to extract an audio file of Hinata saying a single word, a word Luke also heard inside his head during the second episode. Weijo. The episode opens in the ravine, where Jamila and Casper awaken to find that Mr. Edwards died during the night. His death panics the traumatized children even more except for Monty, who demands everyone stay put instead of trying to climb out. When a kid attempts to stand up to him, the bully has one of his goons throw rocks at his head until he relents. Casper decides he's had enough and takes back the vote he cast the night before for Monty to be in charge. Monty fights back by revealing Casper's secret, relaying it in the worst way possible by highlighting how he didn't stop his dad from crippling his mom. After absorbing this awful humiliation, Casper storms away from the group and begins climbing out of the ravine himself, determined to find help or die trying. As he gets near the top, Monty decides that the rest of them should be able to do the same, which is weird considering how we left things with him last episode, but whatever. As his classmates begin climbing beneath him, Casper makes it to the top and stares in stunned silence at the destruction surrounding him. In addition to the destroyed roads, they find pieces of a Russian satellite that fell in front of their bus, thus proving that Casper wasn't the reason Mr. Edwards drove into the ravine. While he examines the wreckage, Jamila walks up and hands Casper his sketchbook. He stares at the Russian writing on the satellite wreckage and turns to a drawing he did with the exact same lettering. This is likely supposed to be a shocking reveal, but is more likely to make your eyes roll out of your head. Why can't a kid have a medical issue involving seizures without it being turned into a superpower? The kids decide to head home and begin walking down the road, but Monty forbids it. This leads to Casper finally standing up him, pointing out that he has no leverage now that he's already done his worst. Monty tries to counter by shoving the boy down, but Casper isn't fazed. After getting up, he explains that having 3 older brothers negates any physical threat the bully might represent. Sensing the shift in dynamics, the rest of the kids begin to crowd Monty as well. He tries to seem unaffected, but clearly feels his power slipping away, especially when Jamila suggests to unanimous approval that they all go home and he stay there. After one of the kids declares that the king is dead, roll credits, Monty is forced to follow the group when even his most loyal goon begins walking with them. Anisha wakes up to find her husband laying on the floor and looking through at phone. When he tries to call out to her, she pretends to be asleep, allowing her to hear him begin to cry. Later, the kids are discussing how weird things have been between their parents when Sarah notices a weird black rock in Luke's bag. Luke refuses to say where he found the object and warns his sister never to touch it. All those issues get put on the back burner when the military comes in and orders everyone in the hotel, and the entire Tri-County area, to evacuate. Ahmed decides to get out and ask one of the soldiers for directions, which allows Anisha to look at his phone. No matter how upsetting she thought the contents would be, nothing could have prepared her to discover that Ahmed's mistress was pregnant with his child. When they get back on the road, Anisha sits in stunned silence before starting to suggest baby names for Ahmed and his side piece. Luke also begins demanding that they stop so he can pee, which makes things even more tense. After they pull over, Luke runs away to relieve himself while his mother tears into Ahmed for his cruel stupidity. Their fight comes to an abrupt halt when Sarah points out that Luke has disappeared. Ahmed takes Sarah into his arms as he and Anisha search for their son well into the night. Just when all hope appears to be lost, the broken family finds a house owned by an elderly couple named Patrick and Kelly. As luck would have it, they just happen to find Luke, who must have sprinted into the woods to get that far ahead of his parents. The couple are also more than happy to offer food and a place to stay for the evening. That night in front of a roaring fire, Luke admits that he thought he could make things better by running away. In his mind, disappearing would ensure that the deteriorating conditions of his world couldn't get any worse if he wasn't there to experience it. Anisha promises her son that their family will get through this together, although it's unclear if together will include her husband. After 2 days of searching, Kuchi excitedly points out what he believes, or it looks like he believes, to be their quarry, a group of lost goats. Trev becomes all types of angry and is about to give up when his locator starts beeping. He ditches Kuchi, who we don't see again, and tracks the signal to the basement of a barely staffed medical facility. After exploring for a bit, he heads down into the basement and discovers a doctor secretly taking care of his badly injured friend Chavez. The soldier doesn't remember how he got there, but definitely remembers what he saw right before they were all blown away. Chavez also implies that he knows about Trev's strained relationship with his wife and tells him to get home to her. Before they can leave, the doctor chastises Trev for the damage the US military has caused. Before he can counter her claims, they hear gunfire upstairs from a group of Taliban fighters who followed him to the facility. Trev leads the doctor back the way he came and waits for the men to come downstairs. He guns down 2 of them and knocks over some shelves to block the path of a third Taliban fighter descending the steps. This last part ends up being completely unnecessary when an alien much smaller than the one Trev saw lurks through the shadows and pounces on their pursuer. Unlike last week's Starro impersonator, This extraterrestrial creature looked like a dog-sized version of those sticky wall crawler toys my fellow 80s and 90s kids will remember. Also, do the aliens target anything specific or just randomly attack large cities and individuals as the plot requires? Trev unhooks Chavez, carries him out of the building, and heads for a nearby truck, shooting down Taliban fighters along the way. He also totally ditches the doctor, making her the second Good Samaritan Trev has ghosted this episode. After getting Chavez inside the vehicle, however, he discovers that his friend has already died. Distraught and enraged, he takes his anger out on the approaching Taliban forces before driving away. Mitsuki is interrogated by the space program director, Akira, and government agents, who refuse to believe something ripped apart Hinata's shuttle despite the video file showing that's exactly what happened. As far they're concerned, an object that could do that would have shown up on their satellites first. Akira posits that it might have been space junk, a ridiculous theory that Kaito corroborates in an effort to save his own skin. Akira also tells Mitsuki that she won't be arrested, but can never set foot inside the building again. As she leaves, Kaito gives chase and tries to apologize. She rightfully chastises him before pointing out that with all the terrorist attacks around the world right now, it's perfectly logical to at least suspect something targeted Hinata's shuttle. Mitsuki is also convinced that it was Hinata's voice that said Weijo, which must have been some type of warning. She doesn't know what it meant, but is determined to find out. The next day, Mitsuki goes to visit Hinata's father, Togo, who we learn hadn't spoken with his daughter in 3 years due to his disagreement over choices about how she lived her life. After awkwardly trying to explain that she didn't know Hinata well, Mitsuki asks to use the bathroom and visits Hinata's room instead. She takes in her deceased lover's belongings, going so far as to lay down in her bed and stare at a single glow-in-the-dark star on the ceiling like the one in her purse. This of course leads Togo to come and find her. The man reveals that he also worked for the Japanese space program along with his brilliant deduction that Mitsuki was Hinata's secret lover. She responds by dressing him down for not accepting his daughter for who she was. Togo responds that he and his daughter were not estranged because of her sexual orientation, it was because he'd been angry with her for hiding who she truly was from the rest of the world. He also couldn't bear seeing her date men just to keep up appearances, like the movie star that was mentioned in the first episode. As you might imagine, Mitsuki is stunned, especially when Togo says he's glad his daughter didn't hide her true heart from her. It's all a little hard to believe, but still makes for a nice moment. This leads to Mitsuki telling him about Hinata's final transmission, which Togo asks to hear. After listening through once, he rewinds it and cranks up the volume. More strange noises come through this time, causing the sand in a nearby Zen garden to move strangely. Togo asks if the Japanese space program might have a bigger sound system so they can see what is really on the recording. The episode opens with Trev arriving at the base, which is completely empty. This understandably freaks him out, but he still has the presence of mind to grab some water and ammunition. Afterward, he goes to the base's communication center and attempts to make contact with other US forces. When no one answers, Trev begins scouring the area for clues as to what happened. He eventually finds a discarded communication indicating that the base was evacuated due to an unknown hostile contact. Now completely alone and distraught, he buries Chavez while promising to honor his friend's final request and return to his wife, Lyra. That night, he manages to get a call through to Lyra, who asks if he's been watching what's happening on TV. Trev doesn't know exactly what she's referring to, but is pretty sure it's connected to the craziness he's been dealing with. After asking if she's safe, he informs her that he's heading to a NATO base the next day to come home. Lyra tells him not to, alluding to the severe rift in their marriage caused by him abandoning her. Before Trev complete his case, they both stop to listen to the president, who officially announces that the Earth is under attack from an extraterrestrial force. Upon hearing this, Trev once again tells Lyra that he's coming home, this time leaving no room for debate. After walking through the scenic countryside for a while, Casper and company happen to find an abandoned vendor truck filled with delicious snack food. While the rest of their classmates pig out, Casper and Jamila wonder where the vehicle's driver might have gone. As she departs to partake of the food, Casper opens the door and notices a black substance on the driver's seat. When he waves his hand over it, tiny spikes emerge from the goop and follow his movements. Before things can get too weird, the truck's radio crackles to life. Casper beckons the most tech-savvy kid in the group, Alfie, to see if he can get a signal or contact anyone. After finding an emergency broadcast recording and a random person asking if anyone's there, Alfie locks onto a harsh-sounding frequency that nearly causes Casper to have a seizure. Thankfully, Monty tears out the radio and smashes it before that can happen. The other kids are justifiably pissed at him for destroying their only means of communication, but Monty counters that it doesn't matter since adults are to blame for whatever caused the chaos and destruction that put them in this situation. This leads to one of the kids asking Monty if he actually wants to go home, causing him to storm off. Casper follows and gently declares that he knows Monty's fake story from before was at least partially true. Monty admits that his home life is actually terrible, thus why he doesn't want to go back to it. Their unexpected bonding moment is interrupted by Jamila, who tells the boys that no matter how awful the grown-ups in their lives have been, everyone in the group needs to buckle down and focus on getting home. When they walk back to the bus, however, the trio are surprised to discover that most of their classmates want to stay and eat snacks while they wait for help. Casper and Jamila decide to keep moving along with Alfie, and kid whose name I can't find. Monty also ends up joining them after Alfie says he's too scared to do so, and Casper sticks up for him. Mitsuki uses her JASA credentials, which were inexplicably never revoked, to enter the command center and confront the director. Akira threatens to call security, but decides not to when Mitsuki says he needs to listen to something. She then plays the Weijo recording for him, explaining how the sound of Hinata's voice proves that the shuttle's cabin couldn't have depressurized. If her theory is correct, then Hinata and the rest of her crew could still be alive. Akira is understandably skeptical and initially refuses to entertain her theory. He quickly changes his mind when Mitsuki asks what he would do if it was his wife, and there was even the smallest chance of saving her. Akira also reveals that Mitsuki isn't the only one who heard something on the recording. The Japanese government has brought in linguists to help JASA interpret another pattern on the recording, which Mitsuki describes as language without sound. This leads her to conclude that whatever destroyed Hinata's shuttle was extraterrestrial in origin, which Akira confirms. He then informs her that the Americans will be joining their investigation, which, for some reason, means that Hinata and her crew will be forgotten. He ends their meeting by refusing to officially help Mitsuki before handing her his badge, so she can covertly gather equipment or resources, and maybe save the woman she loves. As the kids are finishing up breakfast, Anisha hears Patrick asking Ahmed to go to the store with him to look for supplies. Since Ahmed is the absolute worst, he tries to beg off the trip on account of wanting to be with his kids. Thankfully, Anisha offers to go in his place. She then tells Luke that he's the man of the house while she's gone, and heads to the store by herself. I have no idea why Patrick went from asking Ahmed to go with him to letting Anisha go alone. Anisha arrives at the store to find it looted and almost completely picked clean. As she looks for anything left to take home, a pair of soldiers show up and ask why she's out when there's a curfew in effect. They also ask if she needs a doctor, which leads to Anisha telling them she actually is a doctor, sort of. Upon hearing this, the soldiers inform her that they're heading to the next town, which is in desperate need of medical assistance. If she can help, they'll provide her with provisions to take home to her family. Anisha agrees and is loaded into an ambulance with other medical personnel the military just happened to find out and about. She introduces herself to one of them with a fake name before they depart. After arriving at the makeshift medical facility, Anisha scrubs in and takes off her wedding ring, subtle symbolism. She then wanders in a haze a bit before the man she met on the ambulance asks for her help treating a laceration. Anisha almost immediately recognizes that something isn't right and ends up discovering a tiny black organism on the inside of the wound. She removes it from the patient, earning her colleagues' admiration and gaining some much-needed self-confidence. Later, the same presidential announcement Trev and his wife heard sends shockwaves through the medical facility. Anisha looks like she wants to go back to her family, but is convinced by one of the soldiers and the doctor she helped to move on to another town and continue helping people. The episode opens with Anisha in shock along with everyone else at the president's announcement. As she and the other doctors are transported to the next town via ambulance, one of them begins discussing how a school was taken out by a recent attack. This causes Anisha to think of her children, which in turn causes her to demand that they turn around. When the driver refuses, she gets out and begins running back to them instead. After traveling a few miles on foot, she comes across a convoy of soldiers who were ambushed and eviscerated by aliens. She tries to make use of their armored transport but is unable to get the vehicle started. With more than a little trepidation, Anisha takes a weapon off one of the dead soldiers before continuing to sprint back to her family. By the time she arrives at Patrick and Kelly's house, the sun has set and a storm is starting to roll in. When no one answers the door, she kicks in a window and climbs inside. It immediately becomes clear something is wrong when the house is dead silent except for a whistling tea kettle. Anisha's frantic search for her family is interrupted when she finds a strange black substance covering one of the walls. Things become exponentially more creepy when she trips over Patrick and Kelly's dog, who's been eviscerated and covered in the black goo as well. She barely has time to freak out over this discovery when something breaks into the house and starts making scary smoke monster-esque noises. Anisha responds to this by going full 80s horror victim, abandoning her gun and fleeing upstairs instead of out from the house. Luckily, she runs into a closet connected to the attic, where Patrick pulls her to temporary safety, while the creature's rumblings cause the entire house to shake. As Patrick warns her to stay on the attic beams and keep her voice down, Anisha is overcome with relief at seeing her children, who run from their father into her arms. The warm reunion is cut short by the creature moving beneath them again. Ahmed tries to assure his children and Kelly that the aliens likely want water instead of them. Kelly astutely counters that his hypothesis doesn't make much sense when one of them is doggedly lurking inside of the house. She then begins to panic, likening the aliens' arrival to a prophecy foretold in the Book of Revelation before declaring that she can't breathe due to a lack of air in the attic. Ahmed tries to calm Kelly down, which results in her turning the panic she's feeling toward him and his family. When she demands they leave, Anisha agrees, but Patrick stops her. His seemingly kind gesture turns menacing when Anisha insists, and Patrick points his shotgun at her. As far as he's concerned, an attempted exit may draw the creature toward all of them, thus requiring everyone to stay put. She attempts to take her children and leave. A scuffle ensues, resulting in Sarah falling through the attic floor. When Sarah begins crying, Anisha kicks in a larger hole in the floor and drops down to rescue her. Ahmed finally does something good and tries to follow, but is stopped by Patrick, who holds him and Luke in gunpoint. Anisha sweeps Sarah into her arms and hides behind a door as the creature begins searching for them. Unless you count the giant starro-looking thing from the end of episode 2, this is by far the best look we've gotten at one of the aliens up close. My description of them is dog-sized versions of those sticky wall crawler toys from the brief glimpses we got in episode 4 still feels APT. As the house begins to shake, Kelly steps back toward a soft part of the attic floor, and one of her legs drops through. Patrick runs over to help his wife, but is unable to rescue her before she's brutally pulled down and killed. Ahmed uses the gruesome distraction to gather Luke and escape from the attic. Anisha escapes downstairs with Sarah and hides behind the basement door. While holding her daughter, she notices that the girl has a bloody wound on the back of her head due to her fall. She then opens the door and sees Luke with Ahmed, who she quietly warns about the nearby creature that's now made its way to the dining room. Anisha tries to get her husband to meet them in the basement, but he silently implores her to follow him outside instead. While this seems like one of the rare times Ahmed has been in the right, the door he wants to leave from is barricaded, meaning that an exit from that area would produce a great deal of noise. After he refuses to heed Anisha's whisper-shouted warnings about this, she convinces Luke to join her and Sarah behind the basement door, much to her husband's chagrin. Despite having every reason to let him die, Anisha reopens the door to see if she can still help Ahmed. She spots the alien creeping up on his location, but is unable to warn her husband before the creature pounces on him. Anisha grabs the gun she dropped before, shuts the basement door, and takes the children downstairs. She then breaks out one of the hopper windows and ushers the children outside. She also manages to get outside moments before the creature arrives downstairs to kill them. She and the kids make it to Brian's car just as he's running outside too. Instead of demanding them to stop, he tosses Anisha the keys and tells her to start it. She gets Luke and Sarah inside the vehicle and starts it up while Brian reloads his shotgun. Before she's forced to make a decision on whether or not to help the old man, the creature jumps out and attacks him. Anisha screams and puts the car in reverse, slamming it into a tree and getting back wheels stuck in the wet mud. As she tries to power the vehicle free, the alien jumps onto the hood and busts through the windshield. Anisha screams for her children to crawl into the very back of the car before aiming the gun and firing at the creature. When this proves to be completely ineffective, she throws the gun followed by any nearby object she can find. She eventually grabs the weird black rock her son had been covetously hiding, but also saw fit to leave in the car, and stabs the alien with it. This predictably results in the creature's death. After shoving the alien's husk out of the car, Anisha is just about to leave when a badly injured Ahmed emerges from the house. Despite all the awful things he's done, she can't help but feel relieved to see her husband alive. She runs out and helps him into the car, where he gratefully holds his son's hand. With her broken family alive and together against all odds, Anisha powers the vehicle out from the mud and drives them away. The episode opens right where we left off last week, with Anisha driving her family away. She asks Luke where he got the rock that killed the alien, but his answer is interrupted when Ahmed picks that exact moment to start dying from his injuries. Dude is seriously the worst. Anisha, on the other hand, uses this moment to prove that she's an absolute badass. After stopping the car, she MacGyvers a flutter valve, inserts it into Ahmed's lung, performs CPR, and saves his life. To Ahmed's credit, he immediately realizes how grateful he should be and thanks her. Later, Anisha's family finds an abandoned diner along with a much-needed respite from the horrors they've recently faced. As Anisha fires up the grill, Ahmed asks why they never did more fun stuff together as a family like before. "I wish I was kidding." Anisha points out that they did, but he was never there for it. Ugh. Ahmed replies that he's here now, UGH. This cringe-worthy moment is made even worse when the family sits down together for dinner and the kids talk about how thankful they are to be together. As their family has its first genuinely happy moment that we've ever seen, the camera pulls back to show a Space Invaders arcade game. The next day, Anisha takes her family to a makeshift refugee camp so that Ahmed can receive proper medical attention. She ends up running into the doctor she worked with back in episode 5, David, which is both surprising and ridiculous. After the most awkward patient exchange ever, Anisha and the kids are led to their own private living area. Turns out the soldier in charge of the camp was in the town where she briefly worked as a doctor. He also remembers how awesome she was, thus affording her special treatment. After the soldier leaves, Luke asks his mom if she gave up on being a doctor because he was born. Anisha responds that she wanted to be his and Sarah's mom more than anything. While driving to a military base, Camp Travis, Trev comes across a dead alien along with a tanker truck whose driver is burnt to a crisp. He sees a family walking nearby and demands to know what happened. The father informs him that Camp Travis has been destroyed as well. He then asks Trev to join his family on their 200-mile walk to Kabul in the hopes of finding a plane out of the country. Trev instead offers to drive them. On the ride over, Trev gets ticked when the father allows his son to drink an entire bottle of water without rationing it. This leads to a discussion about how hope is like water, which leads to a discussion about how the man's children are equipped for this crisis because their homeland has always been part of an invasion. Neither sentiment is anywhere near as profound as the show seems to think. The man then asks Trev about his children, claiming that he could tell the soldier was also a dad because he had the father's eyes. Instead of answering, Trev decides to be a big old jerk and gives him the silent treatment. The group arrives to the Kabul airport to find it empty, but decide to check things out anyway. Sure enough, There's a military cargo plane being swarmed by civilians desperate to leave the country. And unfortunately for the potential passengers, the soldiers guarding the plane are only allowing those who give them bribes to board. Trev is able to muscle his way on, but the family he traveled with isn't. He manages to get them on board by offering the soldiers his gun. As the plane begins to take off, the father tells Trev that God watches over him. Trev has a hard time agreeing with him, especially as he watches all the people on the tarmac still desperate to board the aircraft as it prepares to take off. Casper and company stop by a phone booth to see if they can reach anyone. Unfortunately, all the phone and power lines appear to be down. Just when they're about to give up hope, Monty spots a vehicle speeding in their direction. The driver tries to go past them, but Casper steps into the middle of the road and forces her to stop. When they ask for a ride to London, the woman explains that she won't go back in that direction on account of an alien killing her entire family. Despite living in a small town outside of the city, the creatures still came for them. The kids are shocked by her claims, with Alfie and Darwin still believing there to be a more earthly cause behind the disasters surrounding them. Casper once again asks if she can help him and his classmates get back to London. This time the woman agrees. After getting dropped off on the outskirts of the city, the kids find it to be in pretty bad shape and eerily quiet. Alfie and Charles head off to their homes while Casper and Jamila head in the opposite direction toward theirs. Monty, on the other hand, decides to go off on his own. As far as he's concerned, whatever's happening in the city still can't be as bad as returning to his family. Before going their separate ways, Monty gives Casper a genuine and heartfelt apology. Casper accepts, allowing for at least one good thing to come from the world falling apart around them. With that strangely touching goodbye out of the way, Casper and Jamila first head toward Casper's house. As they start to get close, Jamila tells him that she knows he's hiding something. After hesitating to reveal anything, Casper admits that his epileptic seizures now feel as though they're accompanied by a voice, hence the drawings he was able to make that we saw back in episode 4. For some reason this inspires Jamila to kiss Casper. Before their lips can meet, however, the pair hear an alien coming toward them and hide. Guess the aliens don't like painfully forced romantic moments either. As Casper and Jamila hold their breath in each other's hands, the creature hears gunfire in the distance and heads off to kill another random person. Mitsuki, Ikuro, Hinata's father, and Kaito, Mitsuki's friend, head toward a government satellite station with the equipment Mitsuki was allowed to steal from Jasa. Kaito doesn't believe they will discover any new information or that Hinata is still alive, but Ikuro and Mitsuki refuse to give up hope. Thanks to some online finagling, they're able to gain entry to the satellite station with relative ease. Mitsuki is also able to convince the crew inside that she's in charge via supreme self-confidence and sheer force of will. With that minor task out of the way, she commands them to pinpoint the source of the weird sound from the recording of Hinata's shuttle being destroyed. Once that's done, Mitsuki intends to find a way to send a message back. After a bit of fancy sciencing, Mitsuki is able to determine that the sounds they're picking up in space are coming from the alien invaders' network. The high volume of separate voices all happening at once also makes it likely that the network is some sort of hive mind. Mitsuki tells the satellite station crew see if they can lock in on the singular voice, Hinata's, inside the hive. It takes a few hours, but they finally manage to find the distress beacon that was emitted from Hinata's shuttle before it got destroyed. Unfortunately, soldiers burst in and take Mitsuki into custody before she can do anything with the information. The episode opens with Trev's cargo plane landing in the United Kingdom. He disembarks, finds the base commander, and demands to be put on the next plane headed toward any city in the United States. Unfortunately, nothing is flying out on account of the alien invasion. As far as the commander is concerned, their primary purpose is to keep the surrounding area safe. He also points out that Trev's plane was one of the lucky few that didn't get knocked out of the sky before reaching its destination. When Trev continues to push his case, the commander allows him to leave the base with a sidearm to see if he can find a sailboat back across the Atlantic. He initially begins his journey by heading into London via a car, but is forced to abandon the vehicle after discovering that all the major roadways are blocked. After hiking through the country a bit, Trev reaches a vantage point that allows him to see just how devastated the city is. With his options running thin, Trev goes to a nearby phone booth to call Lyra. He ends up reaching a voicemail recording of her that she made specifically for him. After grimly describing the devastation in the United States as a war we can't win, Lyra tells Trev that she will always love her husband, but also love him. She starts to explain how love doesn't die just because a person does moments before the message cuts off, of course. Trev takes a moment to gather himself before replying that he will always love him too, which would seem to indicate that they're both speaking about a deceased son. He also promises that he loves her, will always be there for her, and hopes she gives him another chance. Trev then hangs up the phone and sinks down next to the booth, struggling not to let despair and exhaustion finally overtake him. Over in the States, Anisha finally gets a chance to speak with David, her doctor friend from before. She learns that he also had severe family issues, which lead to him and his wife getting a divorce. After sharing that connection with each other, he once again explains how badly they need her at the shelter before asking to show her something. Turns out that something was how low their supplies were, which he parlays into a speech about how they need survivors of her ilk before starting to kiss her. Anisha is hesitant at first, but ends up passionately kissing David back. This moment of passion somehow leads to Anisha admitting that she never finished medical school. She also explains that it wasn't just her medical training that helped keep her family alive, it was also the strange piece of rock that Luke had in his book bag. Elsewhere, a recovering Ahmed comforts his daughter and actually sounds like a decent person for the first time in the show's run. He then goes looking for his wife and son. When Anisha returns with David and finds her family missing, she leaves him and begins searching for them. Meanwhile, Luke finds a boy named Jack who asks if he wants to see something cool that the grown-ups don't want them to see. Sure enough, Jack takes him to see a dead body that's covered in black alien goo. When he explains how his dad says the aliens can't be killed, Luke counters that his mom can and begins to take out the alien rock from his book bag. By the time Anisha finds him, Luke has an audience consisting of his father, sister, and Jack's family, all of them watching in disbelief as the black goo on the corpse reacts to the rock in his hand. In London, Casper and Jamila make it to Casper's apartment, where they find that one of the aliens took time off from interplanetary domination to infiltrate a low-income housing unit and murder his mother at the dinner table. After taking some time to let him grieve, Jamila asks Casper to tell her about his mom. He responds with a description of someone who was both a wonderful parent and person. He also insists that if he'd been there, he could have killed the alien that killed her. This firmly convinces him that they need to go where Jamila's mother works, the hospital, and find her before it's too late. Like most of us would, Jamila asks what he could specifically do to help. Casper responds that in addition to being able to see the aliens in his mind, he can also feel their presence when they're nearby, and even before they got to Earth. Because of this, he's convinced that having a seizure that won't stop, something that could likely be induced at the hospital, will allow him to talk to the creatures. It's still not clear how talking with them like this would help, but whatever. On their way to the hospital, the pair see a group of soldiers firing at one of the aliens climbing a nearby building. Instead of sticking around to watch that awesomeness play out, they duck into a bar and find our old friend Trev, who's drunk and has clearly given up on going home. When Trev refuses to help them get to the hospital, Casper explains that he saw the aliens before they arrived and might know things that could stop them. Predictably, this does little to convince the soldier to join them. His interest is piqued, however, when Jamila shows him one of Casper's drawings that features a black blob attacking his unit's insignia. Trev still isn't convinced this means anything, nor am I, but it's enough to make him decide to help. Over in Japan, Mitsuki has been handcuffed to a desk and put under guard while the authorities figure out what to do with her. She's eventually paid a visit by her old boss, Akira, who apologizes for having to turn her in before demanding she hand over everything she's found. He also reveals that they have a fixed location on something holding the remains of Hinata's shuttle, essentially making it the only form of communication Earth has with the alien invaders. When Mitsuki refuses to help, Akira tells her it's time to accept that Hinata is gone and that situation has become something much different than them now. Mitsuki agrees to help, but only if she's the one who gets to make contact. The military and government leaders take Mitsuki and her team to another room and allow her to get back to work. After a bit of fancy sciencing, she's able to open two-way communication between their location and the remains of Hinata's shuttle. Unfortunately, using human languages does nothing to open up a line of dialogue. In response, Mitsuki begins decoding and repackaging the alien sounds as data, I think. Whatever the case, we know it's going to work because her fancy science solutions always do. While she's working on this, Kaito confesses that he cares about Mitsuki more than anyone in the world. It's supposed to be a sweet moment, but just ends up feeling supremely awkward and ill-timed. While all this is going on, a soldier watches from a monitor as an alien specimen is operated on. He gets a phone call, tells the person on the other line that there's been no progress, and then assures whomever he's speaking to that he won't tell anyone. Later, Akira tells Mitsuki that Los Angeles has gone dark. He also reminds her that her job is only to keep the lines of communication open and to let the linguists do their job, but she refuses. She also acknowledges that the language is too complex for her to translate as well. Instead, Mitsuki has begun taking old video files that Hinata sent to her when they were still together, converting them into the alien's language and transmitting them. After a few tense moments, the aliens, or Hinata, respond by repeating one word back, Weijo. Just like last week, there is a TON wrong with this episode. One area that's brought into sharp relief is Trev's phone call to his wife. Shamir Anderson absolutely sells the hell out of this scene, but that still can't change how ridiculous the ambiguous "I'll always love him" line is. Instead of playing it off from long-seated hints or creating an intriguing new wrinkle, it's used for one moment of ambiguity before moving on to the next vague plotline. It's also neat that we finally see Trev meet up with other established characters, but I hate that it's in service of exploring Casper's ever-shifting seizure powers. Now they're telling us that his seizures had him seeing the future before the alien attack? I can believe him randomly getting stranded with the girl of his dreams in post-apocalyptic London, but that's plain absurd. As for Anisha, I have no problem with her getting a genuine love story, but with genuine being the operative word. Yes, she's been through absolute hell and back, but I don't think that would make her immediately fall into the arms of some milquetoast admirer who she's spoken with all of 10 minutes. And don't even ask me about Mitsuki's plotline, because I have no idea what's going on there. Between us going back to Weijo and her sending old vlogs to the aliens, I'm halfway expecting Hinata to descend from the clouds and explain that the aliens have dubbed her their queen and the war is over. Heck, maybe Sheriff Tyson can be her sergeant at arms. Of course, peace won't be possible until the aliens explain their need to kill random people in isolated settings in between their vast, and nearly invisible, attempts at world domination. Perhaps that answer will come when we figure out why Luke's nose didn't bleed or what that soldier was looking at on his monitor. With only 2 episodes left, however, I fear we're past the point where a satisfying conclusion is possible. Much like the rest of Invasion, it's likely to be something nonsensical that's also nowhere near as smart as it thinks. The episode opens with a flashback to Mitsuki and Hinata in happier times. After watching them go from a shared interest in David Bowie to falling in love, we return to the present, where Hinata is floating back toward her destroyed space shuttle. As she gets closer, we hear Mitsuki's uploaded videos playing in her helmet's comm system. She responds to this by transmitting the word Waju. Back on the ground, we catch up to the final scene of last week's episode, Mitsuki desperately trying to respond to her lover who she now knows, or thinks she knows, is alive. Hinata is eventually able to ask Mitsuki and the others to help us. As you might imagine, the United States military isn't at all convinced that the us Hinata's referring to is the rest of her presumably dead crew. They also decide that Hinata's signal is the best target they have for their still operational nuclear defense system. If Mitsuki is unable to somehow get the aliens to stop attacking Earth, they plan to launch a strike in a little over an hour. Things become even more dire when it's revealed that Hinata's voice does not include any breathing, all but confirming that it's not her. Later, Mitsuki realizes she's been cut off from communication with Hinata. and storms into the command center to demand answers. She refuses to accept that the person she's talking to isn't her lover, which is an understandable reaction. She then obliterates any deserved degree of sympathy by yelling about how a planned counterattack could start a war. After one of the leaders in the room points out that they're already in a war, Akira notes that Hinata might still be alive if she's inside one of the alien crafts. This would give them someone on the inside, thus making her a valuable asset. Unfortunately, that scenario would require it to be proven without a doubt that the entity they've been speaking with is really her, something Mitsuki says she can do. She gets back on the microphone and asks Hinata what was the first thing she ever said after coming home with her the first time. Hinata responds by playing a recording of Space Oddity by David Bowie, a callback to their first conversation about how Mitsuki reminded her of him. I get that this is supposed to be an emotional moment, but I hardly think it counts as confirmation that they're speaking with Hinata, especially since Mitsuki uploaded all those files that must have included a lot of Bowie tunes as well. All it really confirms is that the aliens have good taste in music. When the song unexpectedly cuts off, Mitsuki demands that the US military commander reopen communications. He refuses, explaining that her discovery doesn't prove anything, and that even if it did, it's worth sacrificing one life in order to potentially save billions. The nuclear attack will proceed. Mitsuki reacts to this news by laying down on the satellite dish as the last known location of her lover is destroyed, leaving behind a bright light that burns through the sky. Trev gets Jamila and Casper into the hospital where Jamila's mother works as a neurologist, of course. They aren't able to locate her, but they do manage to find another neurologist who can help them. She initially refuses to induce a seizure without a solid medical reason or parental consent, but Trev convinces her via a mix of earnest whispering and intimidation. Casper gets linked up for a trip under the CT scanner and convinces Jamila to go look for her mother. Once she's gone, Trev and Casper begin talking about their pasts, where we finally learn that Trev's son was born very sick, although there's clearly more to the story. With that out of the way, the neurologist induces a seizure in Casper that causes him to see flashes of artistic landscapes and black and white abstract images, all while his neurons move in sync with each other. He also repeats a couple words, Weijo being one of them, and we get a brief glimpse of Sheriff Tyson crying out to the sky before he was murdered. The neurologist and Trev quickly determine that Casper is seeing what the aliens see. Seconds later, Casper wakes up and begins screaming that the aliens are inside the building. Sure enough, one of those FX budget-friendly wacky wall walkers heads inside the hospital and starts tearing stuff up. Despite not being hooked up to the CT scanner, Casper continues having mini seizures, which allows him to track the aliens' movements as he and Trev search for Jamila. Once they find her, he sees that there's actually more than one alien inside the hospital and leads them away from an ambush. When the pair of aliens close in on their location again, Casper announces that they know he's here and that they're coming for him. Moments later, one of the creatures locates the group and begins pursuing them. Trev gets the kids inside a storage closet before turning and firing on it. When that doesn't do anything except piss the creature off, he finds a handy tank of flammable gas and torches it, causing both the alien and Casper to cry out in pain. Trev's joy at finally defeating one of the invaders is cut short when the other zips into the hallway and up into the ceiling, thus allowing it to reach Casper and Jamila. Trev manages to evacuate the kids just in time and leads them downstairs to the hospital's street exit. Unfortunately, this ends up with them surrounded by even more aliens. As the trio prepares to make a final stand, Casper forces himself to have a violent seizure that freezes all the aliens in place. It allows his friends to escape, but also appears to kill him. As Trev and Jamila desperately try to revive Casper, a strange light begins to shine in the sky above them. Over in the States, scientists confirm that the rock Anisha's son was carrying can kill the aliens. Armed with this new knowledge, they order her and her family to prepare for transport to the Pentagon. As they depart, people angrily shout at them for getting to leave and receiving special treatment. Along the way, their transport is ambushed by a group of heavily armed civilians. In a surprising turn of events for a show filled with tropes like this one is, one of the attackers remembers to stop shooting at the transport's armored plating and goes for the tires instead. After the vehicle flips over, the well-armed soldiers take up position to protect Anisha's family against what appears to be 4 other shooters. Seems like the best bet for the family would be to stay put, right? Wrong. Anisha leads her family out of the armored truck, past a hail of gunfire, and into the woods. All snark aside, this actually turned out to be the right move. That same handful of civilians handily takes out the soldiers who had better training, weapons, and cover. They're also able easily to track Anisha and her family in the woods. Upon realizing they've run out of options, Ahmed gears up to complete his redemption arc by telling his wife and kids to flee while he distracts their pursuers. Instead of doing that, however, he crosses paths with a single soldier who somehow survived the ambush and ended up in the woods behind them. As if that weren't enough red flags, the soldier, who is well within earshot of the civilian attackers, tells Ahmed to call out to his wife, which he does. For once, however, Ahmed isn't as stupid as he seems. He calls out the name Angela, which is the fake identity his wife used while working as a doctor a few episodes ago. Anisha realizes she's being given a warning and continues to hide with the children. When the soldier realizes this as well, he commands Ahmed to get his wife to reveal herself or be shot in the head. Ahmed responds by calling his wife by her real name and telling her to run an act that results in him being executed. As Anisha and her family continue to flee, they eventually come across an area of the woods that's covered in the alien's black goo. It also reacts away from Luke's rock, allowing them to pass. When they look up in the sky, a giant light appears that is definitely not the sun. While this was a definite improvement over the last 2 episodes, Full of Stars still has a number of issues that keep it from being enjoyable. Anisha's storyline gave us some decent thrills, but the tension was predicated on circumstances even harder to believe than Earth getting invaded by galactic wacky wall crawlers. To be fair, a handful of civilians could take out a military convoy in under 5 minutes if they had help from someone on the inside. I certainly hope that's what the soldier who killed Ahmed was, at least. Otherwise, having him manage to get behind the attackers and demand Ahmed call out to his wife would be ridiculously bad writing. Those issues aside, Ahmed's moment of redemption was so predictable and unearned that it's hard to feel any sadness over his death. I guess the whole thing with Anisha making out with the doctor was supposed to add some weight to the moment, but it ended up being yet another of Invasion's discarded plotlines. Speaking of discarded plotlines, why the heck did Casper's seizure cause him to see Sheriff Tyson before he died? I suppose we could get an answer during next week's finale, but it would almost have to be completely out of left field at this point. Whatever the case, it sucks that the poor kid had to die just to neutralize 3 aliens. I still have no idea how he planned to stop the entire invasion by himself, but Casper deserved a lot better than that. As for the Mitsuki storyline, your guess is as good as mine. It certainly seemed like Hinata was alive when we saw her floating in space, but that doesn't line up with the revelation about her being able to speak without using any breath. Sadly, it's a mystery we're doubtful to solve since the US military decided to nuke whatever the alien Weijo was from orbit. On the positive side of things, the action in Full of Stars was fantastic. Also, despite being saddled with a plotline that makes almost no sense, Shioli Katsuna turned in an absolute powerhouse of a performance as Mitsuki. Any actor's job is going to get a boost with David Bowie's music as their character soundtrack, but she took things to a completely different level. I'd love to see Katsuna and the rest of this incredible cast in something with a script that utilizes their talent instead of relying on it to salvage what they can from the show. Unfortunately, we still have 1 episode left of what might be the most beautifully produced disaster I've seen from a television series in years. I'd love nothing more than for Invasion to prove me wrong with a barnburner of a finale, but it's burdened with far too many disjointed narratives for that to be a real possibility. The episode opens with Mitsuki in mourning while the rest of the world celebrates the alien invaders being defeated. After Ikuro drives her home, she finds herself unable to stay there and goes to Hinata's apartment instead. She looks through her lover's belongings, eventually finding a compass that Ikuro said helped spark his daughter's interest in exploration. Mitsuki hangs onto the compass and one of Hinata's jean jackets before packing her belongings back up, this time adding the glow-in-the-dark star Hinata previously placed in her own bedroom before departing for space, back in the first episode. Mitsuki follows the compass north, eventually stopping when a man who's taken up residence in an abandoned Buddhist temple offers her shelter. While eating dinner together, he reveals himself to be the only monk who remained. Their leader attempted to reach enlightenment via meditation without food or water and starved to death. The other monks fled, their faith shattered by the alien invasion. He, on the other hand, sees the invasion as a test. In his mind, the invaders' arrival was a way to remind us how little we appreciate all the things we have, including the many physical pleasures that he and his fellow monks typically denied themselves. Now, he plans to enjoy them all. When the man asks Mitsuki what her beliefs are, she says that she believes in memory not of the past, but in possibility. As far as she's concerned, it would be better to live life in a dream now instead of face reality. The apostate monk replies that his people believed the only way attain true happiness was by ridding yourself of all desires and letting go of the past. That evening, Mitsuki builds a fire outside and places Hinata's jacket inside it. The next morning, she checks her computer and sees that it is still connected to the satellite that helped her pinpoint the alien mothership. She also observes that a strange signal is still broadcasting from the same location. Mitsuki then looks into the sky and sees something that appears to give her a mix of hope and fear. Over in England, Trev and Jamila carry Casper's body back inside the hospital. The boy is breathing, but his heart rate is beginning to fade. They bring him to the same doctor who induced the seizure and put him back under the CT scanner. This time, instead of his neurons firing in an impossible manner, there's no brain activity at all. Despite Trev's insistence that she find a solution, the doctor is unable to save Casper. His brain cells have been destroyed, effectively sentencing him to death once the machines helping him to breathe are removed. Distraught and with nothing left he can do, Trev decides to leave the hospital. Jamila follows after him, reminding the soldier that he saw Casper stop the aliens single-handedly with his mind. Trev counters that it was actually the nuclear bomb that stopped them and not the seizure that killed her friend. Last episode didn't make it very clear if Casper's seizure shut down all the aliens across the globe or just the ones in the room with Trev and Jamila, or if the nuke was what killed Casper because he was connected to the aliens. Trev then tells Jamila that he won't stay and watch Casper die. He already had to do that once before when they unplugged his son from the machines keeping him alive, and he refuses to do it again. Before he departs, Jamila takes one page from Casper's sketchbook and gives the rest to Trev, insisting that he look through it if he truly doesn't believe Casper stopped the aliens. Over in Brazil, military aircraft surround the downed alien mothership. On the ground, a recovery team heads inside and observes what appears to be an organic interior. It also looks like the ship is attempting to heal itself. Hopefully you weren't expecting more information from this scene, because that's all you're going to get. After backtracking through the woods, Anisha finds the spot where her husband was executed after warning her and the children to run. His body is gone, but some blood and brain matter remain as a reminder of his final sacrifice. When she returns to her children, Luke is quickly able to deduce what happened to his father. Sarah tries to rationalize that he might have just been captured, but Luke forces her to accept the reality that their dad is gone. Later, Anisha leads her distraught and hungry children through the woods to an abandoned house. While preparing to take shelter for the evening, Luke sees a report on TV about the aliens being defeated. He tells his mom about it and asks if they can go home, but Anisha refuses, explaining that they still need to hide. She isn't able to justify this decision beyond having a gut feeling, which is weird since they were just being hunted by a militia. Whatever the case, Luke isn't happy with his mother's reasoning for not going home, or that they left his father to die. That evening, the family holds a memorial service for Ahmed. Sarah buries a drawing she made of the entire family along with one of her favorite stuffed animals. Luke sullenly apologizes to his father, then steps away from his mom and sister. Even later that night, Luke walks back to where they held the memorial and chucks the alien rock into the woods. He then looks up into the sky and observes a strange light formation. This somehow inspires Luke to go looking for the rock he just threw. Upon finding it, the boy observes that the object is rippling as if reacting to something nearby. Meanwhile, Anisha awakens with a start to find that Luke is not laying next to her. She then looks out a window into the sky and sees something that worries her even more. Back at the hospital, Jamila is given a chance to say goodbye to Casper before he's unplugged from the machines keeping him alive. She places a headphone from his cassette player in each of their ears, allowing the pair to enjoy some 90s grunge rock one last time together. Later, as Casper is allowed to pass, Jamila is finally reunited with her mother. Meanwhile, Casper's body is wheeled down to the morgue. Although he appears to be completely dead, the boy has a dream in which he wakes up in a house back when his mother and father both lived there. After hearing his parents argue, Casper opens his bedroom door to find a black void in front of him. He walks into it and is greeted by Akuro, who says he never opened his gift and hands him a small red box. Casper opens it to find Hinata's compass, which Akuro explains will help him know where he is and where he's going. A moment later, Casper finds himself alone in a field. He follows the compass toward what appears to be a downed alien spacecraft. The organic vehicle glows and pulses, causing his compass to spin in the opposite direction. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here either. When Trev steps out into the streets of London, he's immediately surrounded by citizens cheering and proclaiming him a hero due to his association with the US military. He walks in a haze past people celebrating and bashing alien carcasses. He then sees a family with a young child, which reminds him of Lyra and his deceased son. This inspires him to head to a nearby phone booth, calls a NATO command center, and requests to be brought home. This time he's told that a flight will be available to him. Before being allowed to leave, Trev is debriefed by a man who explains that the aliens were attempting to terraform Earth. He also says that all the aliens died when their mothership was taken down via the nuclear strike. The man attempts to question Trev about his own encounters with the aliens, but the tired soldier refuses to answer. As far as he's concerned, his only priority is getting home to Lyra. You'd figure this sort of evasiveness would earn him a detainment, but he's granted transport back to the United States instead. On the flight home, we learn via a brief discussion with another passenger that Trev hasn't seen Lyra in 2 years. After arriving at his home, Trev walks inside and takes in the familiar surroundings. Lyra eventually comes downstairs and runs into his arms, overjoyed to see her husband despite their estrangement. Things quickly go south when Trev tells his wife that he loves her. She responds that he is no longer welcome in her house and tells him to leave. He counters by promising to leave the military and be home more, which makes Lyra willing to give him another chance. The next day, or maybe later that same day, Trev and Lyra take a trip to the beach together. As they're unloading the car, Trev begins flipping through Casper's sketchbook. He eventually finds a loose page with 4 columns made out of a Japanese symbol. He uses his camera to translate the word, discovering that it means Hoshi, the same name as Hinata's shuttle. As the couple comes together to look out across the ocean, they're shocked to see what appears to be another alien spacecraft appear in the sky above, or maybe it's the Hoshi shuttle. It's anyone's guess at this point. The least it could have done was give us a solid conclusion. Instead, Invasion provided a cliffhanger ending every bit as nonsensical and disjointed as the narrative leading up to it. My best guess is that Casper's conscience was somehow uploaded to the alien mothership, hence why he saw Akuro, and Casper didn't seem dead anymore. On that same track, it appears that Mitsuki's previous vision of Hinata may have been a dream, and that her lover's conscience was uploaded as well. This is further evidenced by the fact that Hinata was somehow able to swim through space to the destroyed Hoshi shuttle last episode. Then we have the final shot, which still has me completely baffled. The ship looks like it could be a combination of the Hoshi shuttle and another alien mothership, but it could be a different alien species entirely. All of these questions are perfectly fine on their own, but the tangled lot of them feels like a poor attempt at unearned intrigue. Putting aside the fact that it's hard to even care about the invasion at this point, the aliens process makes absolutely no sense. Snarky wacky wall walker comparisons aside, I actually liked the invaders' design. They look strange and, well, alien. What I didn't like was how nothing they were doing made sense even after the terraforming explanation we got during Trev's debrief. Whether it was Orca slapping a squadron of troops, Episode 2, or hunting a family through their rural home like a sticky Michael Myers, Episode 6, the aliens' hostile behavior appeared to be primarily motivated by whatever the script needed. They'll rip a shuttle out of space or kill Casper's mom on a whim, but leave a packed hospital in the middle of London alone until Casper forces the issue. And don't even get me started on all the other dangling plot threads. Luke's nose not bleeding. I assume that it was because he had the rock, but that would have put the object in the proximity of plenty of his other classmates. Also, why the heck did the aliens make all the kids' nose bleed anyway? What the hell was the point of Sheriff Tyson? Was his truncated plotline simply to have Sam Neill draw more people to the show? The way he was featured in the trailers and advertising material, it certainly appeared like his character was going to do a lot more than die in the first episode and never be heard from again. I'll admit to being one of those folks whose interest was piqued by Neill's involvement, but this cast was outstanding. In fact, some of them deserve an Emmy for making the most out of some surprisingly poor writing. One example from this episode was Anisha's speech to Luke and Sarah about listening to the voice inside you to avoid danger. The dialogue on its own was cringe-worthy, but Golshifteh Farahani somehow makes it feel earnest. Another example was when we finally got to see Lyra and Trev reunite. Even in such an emotional moment, Lyra's abrupt change in demeanor and disposition toward her estranged husband was jarring. Thankfully, Tamara Lawrence is so good that she actually makes the scene believable and far sweeter than it had any right to be. All that being said, the cast and beautiful cinematography couldn't save Invasion from being one of the most poorly constructed big-budget series in recent memory. If there's a second season, you'll have to tell me about it. I'd much rather watch the members of this cast on a show where their talents are used to enhance the narrative rather than keep it barely afloat. Thanks for watching till the end. Do like and leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.